This is Eddie Wilson welcoming you to Austin Roots, a podcast about how Austin, Texas became flavored the way it is.
And this is Dr. Jason Mellard, a cultural historian, doing my best to connect the old and the new in this city we call home.
Or the center of the musical universe.
Emma Little was a key figure in the Armadillo World Headquarters scene who went on to commemorate and preserve that history as a leader in the Austin Museum of Popular Culture. She's here today to share her experiences and perspectives. Thanks for joining us, Emma.
Glad to be here.
Wow. There's my Emma.
There I am.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Good to be seen, by golly. Yeah. So what's shaking?
So we often start out asking people how they got to Austin, what brought them to Austin, what their first impressions were. But you're one of those who has roots here. So you can tell us a lot about what it was like to come up in this area. And I just kind of wanted to start with that.
Yeah, I'm pretty much a Travis County girl. I lived all my life in Travis County. When I was growing up, I lived out off of 620 on a big ranch. The closest school that had a bus that would pick us up was Dripping Springs. And I went to Dripping Springs 1st through 12th, and I graduated with 7 kids I started first grade with. There were only 31 kids in my graduating class. It was like right after that everything just kind of exploded. Mm-hmm. When I was 13, a developer came and bought the ranch from the man that my dad worked for. And the developer built a city called Lakeway. And the first people that came to Lakeway to buy property, worked for the Johnson administration, or they were astronauts or military guys. So when I was a teenager, I got to run around with all the teenagers that had astronauts for daddies. I babysat for his aides, the White House aides, because they had houses out there in the summertime. They'd bring their kids and just drop their kids off and leave their wives there and then go back to Washington or whatever. And so I got to babysit for all these bigwigs from, Washington. So I can remember going to church and sitting next door to all these, like Bobby Lane, bad boy football player, and Ben Hogan, one of the sweetest guys I ever met in my life. All these big shots, sitting on the same row with Lady Bird Johnson in church and stuff like that. So to me, it was just, when you're a kid, you just go, eh. It isn't until later that you realize who these people really, really were. These were the people that were holding the power and reigning, so to speak, in the world. And those are the people that I grew up around in my formidable years. And Austin was always the biggest, closest town. I can remember when I was a kid, we'd drive to the closest grocery store, which at one point was the Big Bear Grocery on Congress. And then the Big Bear moved out to Old Torf and South Lamar. And I can remember Ben White and South Lamar being cotton fields or wheat fields or some kind of, they grew crops out there. And I can remember when I was a kid, we used to drive the cattle down 620. I remember when 620 got its stripe. It was out in the middle of nowhere, and we had relatives that would not come out to visit us for fear that they would get lost.
And that Steiner Ranch stuff, that's good history because, the people just moving here know it as like a luxury neighborhood.
Oh, yeah.
But, the Steiners are such a storied, family.
The same thing with Lakeway. They just, in the last few years, they opened up Cat Hollow. And the reason we call it Cat Hollow wasn't just because there were little kitties back there. It's where the mountain lions lived. Mm. That's why it was called that. And so one of the jobs my dad had was making sure that the predatory animals were not attacking the goats or the cattle. And there was a lot of it back then. When I was a little kid, there was still a lot of mountain lions and coyotes and lots of cats. The guy who owned the ranch wanted my dad to move to South Texas. He wanted the family to move to Dilley. And if you've ever been to the valley, you'll know that it's not exactly the most pristine, beautiful place, and you don't really want to go live there. And I told my mother, I said, oh, please, I should beg my dad, don't move us down there. He ended up getting a job with the Lakeway Company and being the greenskeeper. I was so grateful that we didn't have to move to the valley. As soon as I graduated from high school, I had already started a business. I was sewing hippie clothes and selling them at the hippie stores in Austin. And so I moved on to 33rd Street. All those knuckleheads that I knew that I started hanging out with were on 33rd Street. And I met Eddie about that same summer after graduation.
You were 17, I remember that.
I know. I was over at that bar. We met you at that bar. I guess it was the Cactus. And you said, well, I'm going to open this big place up next door, and we were looking at you like you were out of your mind, because all I thought that was a big old junk pile, because it looked like, this giant pile of conduits and air conditioning ducts and metal and twisted up stuff. And there was this whole set of bleachers, and Terry Sue and I were sitting on these bleachers, and you were telling us that what you were going to do with this big building. And then you said you needed help. And I said, well, I can help you, because I had my own business and I could make things work around my own business. But she worked for Texas Instruments, and she couldn't do anything except work for Texas Instruments. That was one of the first high-tech companies here in Austin.
I think we've heard a couple of versions of that story, Eddie, of you showing the place off even before it was a place, when you were trying to sell it to a bunch of people. Is that the case? Is it just like
it was, if people came to visit me, I didn't really have anything else to talk about.
And we just ran into you at the bar, and you just started pitching it to us, and we were going, I forget who we were there with. We went there, I think, to see somebody play music at the
Cactus Club up front. Yeah, of course.
Well, what happened after that was, I said, well, here's my number. Give me a call. I said, I'm on 33rd Street. Leave a note on the door. I was there for the first weekend because, enlisted my help in putting out posters. And I knew Jim, I think, already from the Vulcan.
You probably met Sissy Alex real quick, too.
Yeah, I met Sissy Alex, and I knew Jim, and I knew Bobby Hederman, because I knew Bobby Hederman from Artie, because I had already been hanging out with Artie and that bunch of nuts. And I had just helped them move from 33rd Street over to Red River Street.
Really?
Yeah. Wow. That was in February that they moved in March. Moment. Yes, over to the other side of the world for them. Anyway, that first weekend, you remember, for the first several weeks, we didn't have a beer license.
Oh, for the first year?
Yeah, so we handed out beer.
Yeah, well,
we gave beer away.
People would pull into the 7-Elevens on the way to the show and buy a couple of cases of beer and bring them to Armadillo and bring them in. We didn't stop them. We didn't have a beer license. We couldn't sell them anything. We didn't do anything to try to dampen their humor.
That's true. I had already, started hanging out with all those guys the year before. I remember that Denny got the job to play with Freddie King that second weekend. So, and there's a picture of him that Burton Wilson took of him on stage with Freddie.
Yeah.
So Denny Freeman and Jimmy Vaughn with Freddie King, like in the first weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I knew those guys already, because we would be going to the one night in the summertime from 33rd Street. They all landed about the same time. Denny didn't move here permanently until I think 71, maybe. He ended up having a house that he put his name on for a lease. And I know that everybody at one point or another lived, all the blues guys at one point or another lived at Denny's house. Jimmy lived with him. Stevie lived with him. Alex lived with him. I mean, all the blues guys at one time or another he gave them a bed.
Can you tell us a little bit about that 33rd Street scene?
The 33rd Street, it was this one whole block, the 600 block of West 33rd Street. And I always thought that it would be fun to win the lottery and restore those hippie houses and turn them into like a nostalgic Six Flags, if you would. Nobody ever knocked to go into your house. All the doors were open. No locks, and everybody knew each other, and we all banded together. We always had like Thanksgivings together, and somebody would be working in a restaurant and would feed everybody. Would come home with food from the restaurant. At one point, I lived at 606, and then I lived at 610. And 610 was kind of a storied house because a man who had been a chemist had lived there, Hirschberg. And Hirschberg also owned an incense factory in town. And Hirschberg also was the creator of a substance that crystallized mescaline. That's a whole nother story for a whole nother chapter. 610 was a marvelous house. It was like living at a witch's house, because all of the plants outside were medicinal or psychedelic or something. There was something, they were poisonous or medicinal, and you had to know which flowers they were, or you were going to possibly hurt yourself. I also had a lily pond in my backyard too. And there was this huge attic upstairs, and there was this wine press about the size of an easy chair up in the attic. And dried up against the slats of the wine press were dried peyote buds. because that's where they pressed all the juice out of the peyote to make their substance. Anyway, yeah.
And you mentioned, too, you were selling clothes to some of the hippie outlets around town. What were some of those stores, some of those first?
Well, there was a store called the Maya on Lavaca, and it was next door to the boot shop, Capital Saddle, yeah. And I also put stuff on consignment to sell at Oat Willie's. I really did the best at Maya because I couldn't turn out outfits fast enough. I was making halter tops and peasant blouses and long skirts, and there's not a lot to a halter top, but by golly, in Austin, that was like hot stuff, and the girls wore them all the time. I was making like as many as 40 outfits a week and putting them in stores.
So, Eddie, what do you remember about Emma coming to the Armadillo?
Wow. Oh, my goodness. Yeah. The count my blessings part. I just remembered Steve Yoakum first, covered with sheetrock dust, and his briefs pulled down over his head with the label of his underwear right on his forehead upside down. You just couldn't breathe in there when we tore it all apart. And Yoakum and his underwear on the head. Just about the first inkling I knew that sooner or later I would require a uniform.
That was when we were building the stage on the other side and painting and getting it ready for the grand opening yet again. It was in August, I know that.
We had about 3 wonderful grand openings and a couple of mediocre ones.
We'd open the season after we'd be closed for August because it was always empty in August.
It seemed like we opened with Freddie King the first night, I believe.
Freddie King and Leon Russell.
Leon was determined not to sing and be the star of the show, but he was the reason that they were beating the doors down. That was the same year. I think I looked it up somewhere. The biggest rock and roll stars of each year for several decades, and that was Leon's year, 71, 72. After the English tour came.
Mad Dogs and Englishmen, yeah.
When he was at the height of his fame, he chose to come home to Tulsa and celebrate other artists through that shelter imprint, like Freddie King. And
yeah, there's some wonderful pictures that Burton took of them together that were just, you can tell by the expression in their faces how much they enjoyed being together and playing together. It was, both of them were just each other's biggest fan. It was wonderful to see them and just not on the stage performing, just fooling around and getting ready and practicing and just talking about how they would play the certain tunes and stuff. And they just had more fun collaborating than any other bunch of musicians I can remember. Freddie always gave a good show no matter what. He always gave everything his all when he was up there.
He played right on the verge of too much at Armadillo, but it was always so successful that there was never any reason to put a governor on it.
I mean, he was always just fabulous.
Yeah, everybody knew it was going to be a hell of a show, and they all showed up. God bless them.
They all showed up.
The Freddie audience was super.
Yeah, it was always great to see some of the pictures of the audience as they were watching the shows. You can see by all the people just frozen, like, oh my gosh. And I mean, it was like there were some acts that would just do that. They would just blow away the audience. And when they'd finish a number, there would be like about a 3-second silence before they just explode into applause and roaring and everything. The audience would be stunned by whoever was performing if it was like completely blow them away, like some of the jazz acts. Yeah. Or Frank Zappa. When Frank Zappa was up there, it was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, there were a lot of folks that were not used to getting that kind of response from an audience, and so they all wanted to come back. Sometimes before it seemed reasonable to a booking agent, but they always had a good payday. And even when it was small by comparison to the auditoriums that play in the other cities in Texas, they would still insist on getting rebooked to the Dillo. Thank you, kitchen staff. Thank you, Jan Beeman. Thank you, all those people that turned out such generous portions of real good stuff.
Well, the acts that played there knew where they were going to be taken care of. They knew where they were going to be well fed and housed, and every little bitty need that they had was taken care of. They were happy about that.
It was a kind of a good timing era.
That's true. So many people back then so many young people were open-hearted and open-minded, were wanting to be sharing whatever it was that they had back then to whoever was coming through town. Or they wanted to show off Austin, and they wanted to show off how happy we were here, and that we wanted to share that happiness with them. So,
and everybody coming at the same time made it unlikely that there was a great dearth of or a need for very many of the skills that those people had when they got here. Cheap rent's what made it all happen.
Amen to that.
You had a lot of roles at the Armadillo over time. You broadly class them as hospitality, which kind of fits to what we're talking about. So what were some of the things that you did along the way at the Armadillo World Headquarters?
Well, I used to go to the printer and pick up posters, and then I'd take them to the ticket outlets, and then I'd paste them all over telephone poles and in the store windows around campus. And I'd also go to places like the head shops and stuff their shopping bags that they put merchandise that people would buy with handbills and poster art and stuff like that. So they could just grab a bag and put their merchandise that they had in, go, and they'd have an advertisement in that bag saying, come to the concert. And that helped, actually. Those posters actually did their job. They were the best, cheapest advertising at the time. The other thing I did was I was one of the persons that handed out beers. I would help create different things, different food items on the menus. We all shared recipes of stuff that we knew that were good recipes to share for cafes and stuff. And then besides doing that, I would also go to the airport and pick people up, take them over to Eddie's house, or take them to the hotel, or take them to the club, and always make sure that they had whatever it was that they needed to make the show. That's what I did. And then later on, I worked in a print shop, and I worked with, I was always working with the art guys about the posters anyway. But once I started working in the print shop, I got in on the technical end of things, and we did split fountain work, which was something nobody really ever did. Most printers don't want to do it because it makes a mess of the press. But you put two colors of ink in the well, and then they merge in the middle, and they make it rainbow-like. That's what the split fountain did. And then we take those same images for the posters and turn them also into T-shirts.
I've been advocating to bring back some of those old vintage T-shirts. I think they do well. I feel like Carey's reprinted some of his designs.
Yeah, I wish he would. He did one of a girl with a baseball mitt that was the favorite of every guy in town because it was a kind of a pinup girl with a baseball mitt. And then I know a lot of people have taken a lot of the T-shirts and made them into quilts, which is pretty cool. And the other thing, too, is T-shirts are still being made. I mean, for concerts, but not as many as there used to be. I'm not real sure, but I think that Dale Wilkins probably still has some of those silk screens from those T-shirts. I hope he does anyway. So they're probably down in Corpus somewhere.
Yeah. Now, in terms of picking up artists at the airport, were there any that you were particularly excited or curious about? Do you have any stories on that? Or is it just like a, everyday thing by that point?
It was, at that point, it was pretty much an everyday thing. It's really funny. That's the other part of being, of working there. If you really were serious about doing your thing with these people, some of them were stars and divas, but for the most part, they were just working musicians. You really couldn't be starstruck because if you were, you probably wouldn't be asked to help again in that capacity. There's a certain way that you have to be an act around famous people, and part of it is just treating them like the regular folk that they are. I don't remember falling all over myself to get next to anyone in particular. I can just remember them coming backstage, just help them out, Anyway, it was, there were a lot of acts that were great. I really remember after the shows, after seeing someone play, thinking how wonderful they were and having really enjoyed their show. It all depended on what kind of a person they were as far as, the way that I was impressed by them or whatever. I would ask, technical questions about their instruments or something, and they would go, "Oh, nobody ever asked me that before." I think I approached it more like a student of their ability to perform or how they went about writing a song. Or I think it's probably one of the reasons that have so many musician friends to this day. That's the other thing. Back then, all the people that are somebody now here in Austin were nobodies back then. We got to know them as regular people. We know who they are down to their bones. We know who they are. As far as being blown away or wanting to meet somebody, Nah, not really.
And that's one of the things that I find fascinating about the Armadillo World Headquarters story is the way that it set up a whole generation of Austin arts and culture and politics. Like you're saying, that the people who became somebody, like everyone was figuring it out, in this place at the same time, a generation of young people. And it's both curious to see like who became sort of the breakout stars. And then often that script reads a little differently than if you're reading the newspapers at the time or you're talking to people about what was the most exciting or significant. And so I wanted to ask in particular about D.K. Little, because he's someone whose name comes up a lot as a very powerful singer-songwriter of the period. And yet I think that he often isn't given the credit in sort of the future generations, right?
Yeah. Well, D.K. Little grew up in Lubbock, Texas. When he finished high school, he joined the Navy. When he was in high school, he had already had a band. I mean, he had a band in high school playing music, playing gigs, and he was also had been involved in regional theater and had also done some, stage acting as well. Before he had gotten into the Navy, he had already gone and lived in different places in the United States and had gotten a name as a singer-songwriter in some of these places. And so when he came back to Texas and decided he wanted to come to Austin, because all of his buddies from Lubbock had moved down here, and I knew all of those guys. They were playing. They were playing in the blues bars. They were playing country music. They were playing all over the place. One of them was Alvin Crow, who was a real good friend of his. And before the Navy days, he and Alvin Crow were in a band called Fuzzy Hog Brothers in Amarillo. He came back and he got his own band together. And the first place that he played was the One Night. The One Night, it was just a little divey bar, but careers were built from the residencies played at the One Night. He played there and, had his own band and had his own band for a long time. He has a whole, notebook of music still that, is copyrighted and recorded, but it's just in a box in his daughter's storage unit. But there are some people who have recently approached me who want to record his stuff because they had so much faith in his music. He had written some beautiful songs, and whenever he did a solo act, he played a 12-string guitar, but whenever he was with his band, he played rock and roll guitar. When we went to college and we came back in 1977, the day of graduation, he just went and got on the bus with Alvin and took off on the road. 3 weeks after graduation, was on the stage at Carnegie Hall. Alvin had managed to piss off a union stagehand, and so the union stagehand was not going to hook him up. Not his fiddle, not his amp, not his microphone, not anything, until he acted right. And Alvin did not appreciate that at all. And he didn't get to sing until the last song of the set. And it was a live radio broadcast. They were the warm-up act for Merle Haggard. Everybody in Radioland who had been hearing this radio show thought that the guy singing was Alvin Crow, but indeed it was D.K. Little. So that just, jacked up his percentages with audiences even more. But he stayed with Alvin for years. That was his last real gig, was playing with Alvin. And then he just quit music entirely. It was, something, his body gave up. He had avascular necrosis, which was a disease that he had gotten from being in Vietnam, being exposed to Agent Orange. Mm. And so as a result, he lost his ability to walk, and he had to have surgeries on his spine and had to have hip replacements. And because his body was just crumbling, he just sank further into a depression about his music and didn't play for years. I think it was probably 10 years, maybe even longer than that, before he picked up the guitar. And the only reason he did that was because there was a reunion show of One Night Entertainers, and they were doing a reunion for the One Night. We had gotten a divorce, and I had lived in town, and he was still living out by the lake. And they said, you have to call DK and tell him he's got to play this gig. And I thought, oh, gosh. And so as soon as there was a rumbling about it, I went and I told him. I said, they're going to want you to play. And he goes, what? I said, you better pick up your guitar and get some calluses on your fingertips because they're going to want you to play. And so he was just elated, and he picked up his guitar and he started playing again. And he played that gig. And up until the time he passed away, for those last 3 years of his life, he was happy because he started playing again, and it made a big difference in his life.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a good thing. And the really sad part about it is he got the word from someone else that I was the one he needed to talk to about getting him gigs, which really just this was like a bone of contention in our marriage all of the time. I can help you out with this. You don't know anything about this. This is my. It's like, okay, it's part of that. This is a man's world, and you don't need to worry your pretty little head about it, kind of stuff. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that too. It's an interesting thing. Like, again, reading accounts of the period, it makes it feel like a boys' club, right? That those are the voices that are amplified. But you just have to scratch the surface a little bit to realize that this is shared labor and expertise, and that there are women who are calling a lot of the shots. If we were going to try to correct that original take of the historical record to bring women's voices back in, what are some of the things you think we would learn about Austin in the 70s?
Well, I think you'd learn that the guys who were successful generally had a woman backing them up at home, helping them out, being the person who took the messages on the telephone and who helped book the band for different gigs. One of the persons that was one of the major movers and shakers in this town was Carlin Major. She and her husband ran Soap Creek Saloon. There was never a woman who could hustle better than her. I mean, she booked bands. She was the reason that I think Marcia Ball became a household word. She worked her ass off for different bands. And I mean, she really hustled. Her husband and she ran Soap Creek Saloon. And that was one of the little hottest spots in the state. That was another place people used to love to play in. It was just a honky-tonk beer joint, but I'll tell you what, a hopping place. And everybody loved it. Truly believe that it was Carlin's fault. She was really one of the persons to do that. And the Armadillo, too. I mean, we had women in the office at the very beginning. There's Denny Turner and Jeannie Wilson, who also, put in the hours as well. When Carlotta Pancratz came onto the board, she was also another one. Man, she was a very skilled person at being able to get what she wanted from any deal as far as money and working with the day-to-day operations of the joint. And I think that's where the women came in most, was that because they ran the household, they could also run anything that had a bottom line that had to be dealt with.
I think Joan Petoskey and Bill Crawford in their Stevie Ray Vaughan biography, Caught in the Crossfire, I think they call it something like an invisible matriarchy.
That's true. We were the invisible matriarchy. And there were some gals that you knew who they were. I used to say, yes, I'm fluent in bitch. I can talk bitch real good. Because if you couldn't talk bitch, there were some things you could not get done in this town. And you had to know which ones spoke it fluently. And by golly, you learned the lingo and you did the work. And some guys never got that figured out. And I tend to think that DK was one of those guys. So that's what bit his head off in the early days, for sure.
And Eddie, I wanted to ask you about DK Little as well, to get your perspective on him as an artist sort of in the Armadillo orbit.
Bobby and I didn't agree about everything, but we both agreed that DK Little ought to be a star. He was born with a curled lip, and maybe with a pack of cigarettes underneath his little bitty baby shirt, because he had to look, backed up by the goddamnedest voice you ever heard.
Smooth and velvety.
Yeah, coming from way down somewhere that looked like he wasn't big enough to encompass him, How can that voice be coming out of somebody that size? Yeah, and so we tried every way we could. We opened shows with DK that we thought it would have the right kind of audience to see whoever he was opening for and should hear him so they could pick up on how good he was. Yeah, we've been over backwards trying to help DK, but he could be hard to help,
Yeah. He could be very hard to help. Yes, indeed.
I love the story about him flying back to L.A. with Wexler. And Jerry Wexler spent the whole trip talking to him about how if you just listen to him and let him make him a country record first, he could get on back out of that country stuff. But, you got to wear a disguise, to get on first base. DK reportedly never got off the plane in L.A. when it landed. He stayed on it for the flight back. not going to be talked into signing a record deal.
Was that that moment in the early 70s when Jerry Wexler was signing up with Atlantic, the country division stuff? Yeah, I hadn't heard that story about DK Little because, there's also the story about the Freedom the Fire Dogs album kind of being shot down because, again, the Austinites didn't trust the big record people a little bit.
Right.
But yeah, it would have been a different thing if that Frida album would come out and a DK Little album would come out and that series with the Doug Salmon, Willie Nelsons.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And he had the songs to do it. Some people just fear of the unknown, or having seen something like that happen to somebody else that didn't turn out right, that they were close to. He didn't go for it, and I was like, oh gosh.
We had Mary Martin from Warner Brothers lend an ear. She wasn't going to be quite as easy to enamor as a whole lot of old pros. She had seen the elephant, heard the owl. And if there was going to be any difficulty about whatever it was on the table, she wasn't going to go there.
Yeah.
Love her still, though.
Now, another giant that I think we can get some perspective on here, the terrific Denny Freeman is someone who I think, it's taken a while for the city to catch up, but he's in the pantheon now and not behind the scenes as one of the giants of blues guitar and one of the best guitarists in a town that is really known for them, right?
Right. This is true. He was a hell of a guitarsmith.
He was plain and simple the coolest guy I've ever known. Just get right down to it. He was so correct. He wouldn't let himself think bad thoughts. He was a progressive sort of guy.
Yes, he was. He was about as understated a person as could possibly be anywhere. Wouldn't even hear him laugh loud. I think that Yves Montez wrote the best thing about him, saying that you were lucky if you were on the stage with him and he gave you the thumbs up or the nod so that everyone in the place could see that was going on. Because that was like the best praise you could get from Denny. Or he would hold out his arm and point at you, and that was like, whoa. Denny liked it. It was top notch. Here's this guy who, like I said, the second weekend, the Armadillo's open, he plays. That should say something about who he is right there. I hung out with those guys more than I hung out with the progressive Western guys. I can remember when I started hanging out with DK, all the blues guys would give me grief because he was part of that progressive country ilk. Because these guys, I ran around with these guys, these blues guys. When I say I misspent a great deal of my youth with them, I really did, because those guys were like crazy. My house was sort of the dog house for whenever their girlfriends or their wives would kick them out, they'd need a place to stay, so they ended up staying at my place until they could find their next victim. I was like one of them for a while, whenever they needed me for passing the hat or working the door or whatever. Occasionally I got to go with the Cobras on the road. And, these guys were all my buddies. I knew Denny, I knew Jimmy, I knew Stevie. I knew all those guys back then. Half the time we ate meals together or, whatever. And Denny and Paul Ray were the two older big brothers of that bunch. And when the Cobras got together, that was another band. They should have come out and gotten famous right after Stevie and then Jimmy. And then I think that the Cobras should have been right in behind them because they were the best dance band in the whole land. And Denny was just the cornerstone. And Denny gave Stevie his first steady paying gig. Aside from the fact that he also gave them a bed to sleep in half the time when they first starting out here in Austin, they were all part of that clan, that clique, that blues clique. When Clifford finally opened a bar and gave them a permanent home, it wasn't just Monday night at the one night anymore. It was their permanent bar. That was a good thing. Those guys, Angela was in that group of blues players. God, she was so wonderful. Still is wonderful. Lou Ann came along and just blew the door off of the whole thing again and played with Stevie. While Willie Nelson came in and the country bands came in and made a name for themselves, slowly but surely these guys were digging themselves up out of that and making a big name for themselves in the way back. And that's when Austin, in my opinion, just really exploded on the music thing. It wasn't just country music anymore. We encompassed everything. It wasn't just these Dallas blues guys, and it wasn't just progressive country guys. There were all these guys from Lubbock Cook that came here, like Jesse Taylor, who played with Cracker Jack. And Cracker Jack, was hot shit. The drummer and the bass player from Cracker Jack had played with Johnny Winter. They were on the stage at Woodstock with Johnny Winter. When Cracker Jack came on, that was another great dance band. They had square-toed boots, high-heel boots, and shag haircuts and glitter, and man, they just blew everybody away. All those guys were just incredible players. So we had these bands that were just so good back then that were from here. This was their home base, and they became world famous, all of these players did, because their virtuosity, their ability to perform and enliven a group and make you just want to get up and dance or sing along with the song as you drove down the road, whatever. That's one of the things about Denny did that. He was the understated guitarman, but he made everybody sound so polished and so good. I'm sure that's why Taj Mahal grabbed him and had him in his band for 9 years. I'm sure that's why Bob Dylan grabbed him, because he made that band sound good. He made every band he was in sound good, whether he was playing piano, playing guitar. And then what does he do? He finds DK Little's old steel guitar that was here, that one of the kids left here, and he starts picking it up and playing it. And he learns and teaches himself how to play steel. It's just plain lap steel, no pedal steel. And he wants to play just like the guy on Hank Williams records did. I swear to goodness, he became so obsessed. 8 hours a day, he would practice this thing. 8 hours a day. And he couldn't figure out why his hand was hurting. It was because he was holding the steel bar the wrong way. Somebody had to show him how to hold the steel bar the right way. Then his hand quit hurting. He ends his miraculously beautiful career of playing all kinds of jazz and blues and great music that he played with all these different, musicians. Hell, he even played with Jennifer Warnes. I mean, great records. He co-wrote stuff for Blondie, of all people. Yeah. And he did stuff for Percy Sledge. I mean, he's written stuff for all these people all over the place. And he ends his career by playing just a plain lap steel guitar.
There was a residency out at Sea Boys, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Those country nights that I think will live long in people's memories.
Oh, yeah. And he loved it. If he was still here, that's still the only thing he'd want to do. He had played steel so much, he lost his guitar calluses from playing just a regular neck guitar because all he did was play steel.
Not enough hours in the day.
Not enough hours in the day. And then he taught Lily Pearl, my granddaughter, how to run that steel bar up and down that guitar, too. And then he also taught her how to play the whammy bar on the Strat. So he was marvelous. He was a marvelous musician, and people still will play his songs and go, listen to this. He's playing this whole progression, and now he's playing it in reverse. He could do that. He would just do something completely in reverse and play it note for note the way he played it forward. He was fun to watch, and if you ever got to see him do his jazz show up in the gallery, oh my gosh, that was amazing too.
Yeah.
Everybody, of course, came to that for 7 years. T.G. Badd, 2 guitars, bass, and drums. The Saxon Pub was their best happy hour. There was a reason for that too. They just played the music that they wanted to play because that's the music that made them become musicians.
When they were playing the Saxon Pub, it felt kind of like this podcast, and that it seemed like everyone who was a cornerstone of that scene was in that room at once often.
Yes. So many of the people that went there felt like this was their own private show. Those guys playing to that person. There were guys from Norway that would come here every year just to hear Denny play at the Saxon, because it was like nothing else in the whole world.
We don't often realize how spoiled we are in this town. I remember when Stu Gilbert showed up in town. He was a student of mine, and he came to town specifically, to see Denny play. Yeah,
he was a bobhead for a while, and then he saw Denny play. He said, something's different in the band. What is it? And then he found out it was Denny, and so he said, to heck with Bob Dylan. Whoever this guy is who I'm going to go see. And so he started driving in from Colorado from college to see Denny play at the gallery upstairs, or whenever he was off from the Bob band, he would be here in town, and he'd play these pickup gigs with Bill Carter, or he'd play with his buddy Derek, wonderful guitar player, another blues, and they'd be backing up Blue Ann. Those two guys got her out and started playing gigs with her again, and that's been great. All I know is that we're going to miss him. Already the whole world is missing Denny.
Yeah.
I think the best thing that ever happened to Denny was having Lily Pearl live with us. He just, fell in love with her.
I've never seen anything like it.
I know. Was swallowed up by that child. She just would, Din, come here. And so he'd jump up whenever she'd call his name and say, what do you want? What do you need? What do you need? Let's go for a walk. Let's go make mud pies. Whatever it was, let me tell you. So you were asking me about the Museum of Popular Culture and organization came to happen. I wanted to say that I think that the person whose fault it really is more than anyone else's is Henry Gonzalez, because he was the one who believed in all of those guys. That Armadillo Art Squad, they were really his brothers, if not by blood, by soul. He wanted to make sure that their contributions to culture here in Austin was recognized more than anything. He didn't want them to be just forgotten once they passed on. He wanted their contribution to be part of, and is part of, the fabric of why we are called the live music capital of the world, and why rock and roll art and music art are so hand in hand here in Austin. The best part about that is that the Popular Culture Museum didn't just bring those guys to light, the Armadillo Art Squad, but it also brought to light all of the writers, all of the filmmakers and documentarians. And now we have all kinds of classes at UT taught about this subject.
Henry's memorial wall, is sort of the first draft of all of that, right? It's like the history of that Austin culture, writ in portraiture alongside that Planet K on South Lamar.
Yes, indeed. Yes, it is.
And he's a real spirit of what we were talking about earlier with the early Armadillo days of just, giving and doing, right? He was doing it.
Yeah, always. It's true. He was always working on something. One day I came over and he was painting my house because it needed to be painted. I was like, what are you doing? Your house really needs to be painted, Emma. So I'm painting it. I said, okay. One time Leah couldn't find him for a week. He would get up and leave and not say 2 words to her and come home and pass out. She was going, I don't know where Henry is, and we've got to get this stuff done for the show. And I said, why don't you come over and have a cup of coffee at my house? And he was outside doing stuff with my fence, building something on my fence. And I'm like, I didn't ask him to do it, but he was doing it. And that's the way he was, not just here, but for years, you could see his murals in East Austin. Last summer, Leah Avey Bonar, who is a well-known photographer, actually shot pictures for National Geographic and lives over in South Austin. So she and Leah and I went on this mural tour of the city. So we just were looking at all the different murals. And most of his, except the one of the Aztec sun at Curas Cafe, have been painted over. We found this place in East Austin. It was called the Mustang Auto Repair Shop. It's just called Mustang. On one side, behind a stack of old tires, is a mural of Mustangs running. And he painted it. And it was a real surprise to find it. And she had no idea it even existed. It was nice to find that. He painted so many murals all over the place. And then to see them gone. The one I love the most about the Hernandez Brothers Cafe is that it was a mural that started on one side on the inside of the cafe and went all the way around. And it was history of the Mexican-American culture here in Austin. The Hernandez family had been there for years. And it's the same way with my family as part of Matt's El Rancho. My mother's first cousin was Janie Martinez. Having grown up here in Travis County, I have family all around here. Part of the Los Villarreales that are my dad's side of the family were the ones who helped to create the sausage recipe at Southside Market. My mother's family always made and sold tamales. Our DNA is part of this town, even though you can't hardly find it anymore. But there are things in this city that are a part of us, that will always be a part of us. Not just my family and all the other families, Eddie's family as well. Definitely all of the people that created the music business and the art business here in town. The reason that Austin has grown so big is because this was Groover's Paradise. We made it Groover's Paradise. Unfortunately, what's happening is a lot of that paradise is being covered over or cut into smaller pieces, and smaller pieces are kind of fading into the corners.
Part of the Museum of Popular Culture's mission, right, is to keep that memory a part of this city's identity such that it can't be erased. Right?
Correct.
And, in some ways to inspire, there are always still younger artists, younger entrepreneurs who are trying to keep this thing going, and they face all of these challenges in a city
that's very hard,
hard to afford now. And maybe this story of how people did things can help.
That's true. And I love that there are young people that are doing that. Like you said, it's so expensive now. I think it's time for us to find another sleepy college town, take it over.
Yeah, just as I turn 100.
Yeah.
It's been fun.
Yeah, it's been a hell of a ride.
Well, I've really appreciated you taking the time, Emma. I feel like we've got some new perspectives here that we haven't heard before and really fleshed out this story some. Thank you.
This year has been a particularly crazy first 6 months of the year because I had brain surgery, I had a DBS put in my chest, I had back surgery, and I lost my beloved. So it's been a hard 6 months.
Well, God bless you. God bless you. You've always been a magnet and a beacon for all the folks that we raised at the Armadillo.
Yeah, it does take a village, and we know that for a fact.
I feel even luckier that you joined us, hearing all that. You seem well. I hope you're well.
Yeah, that was the whole idea behind doing this. I could get my warranty updated.
Yeah, you certainly don't look like you've had all of that trauma this year. You're looking good and healthy.
Well, that's why I look good and healthy.
There's reasons to be resilient.
Yes, there are. There are plenty of them.
To fight another day.
Okay, well, Eddie, it's been good seeing you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Hope to see everyone again soon.
Yes.
Enjoy the rest of y'all's day. Bye.
Austin Roots, executive produced by TSSI, produced by Renee O'Connor. Crybaby, courtesy of Jake Andrews Music. You need to get the memoir so you can get ready for the pop quiz. Go to threadgills.com and get Armadillo World Headquarters, a memoir. Do it now and do it right.